When you have light skin, you're not a terrorist. When it gets
Why
darker
do you
and darker,
always, people
you're
like
a
you
terrorist.
always bring race into it? It's got nothing to do with race
like
and
me.
everything to do with people who kill people.
Mm.
Yes, people like you, race baiters like you.
I have not heard you.
Yes.
We had literally people saying the Jews will not replace us, and Donald Trump said they're very fine people. We literally have people, like I said, going against this Capitol right here, committing a violent insurrection. But for some strange reason, when the #1 domestic terror threat in America and also increasingly in Europe and the UK is white terrorists, white nationalist terrorists, white extremists, I never hear anyone say, you know what, we should ban them. We should deport them. Oh, what I instead hear is they have economic anxiety. The double standard here at play has to be exposed, right? And I want people to really think about what they're really advocating. If someone doesn't like your speech, you know what? You're not just going to be not tolerated. You're going to be deported, especially if you're a person of color. How does that make a multiracial society that is both the UK and America safer and better, especially, and I'm speaking now as an American, and you know in the UK, the rising domestic terror threat is not Islamic extremism, which, by the way, exists. It is white nationalist extremism. Not a single word about that. But I hear all these free speech advocates. All these people are all about Western civilization. All of a sudden turn to censorship and all of a sudden become authoritarian when it comes to Muslims and people of color.
Yeah, but hang on.
Why is that?
Hang on.
Piers, let me educate your guest a little bit about his own country. So
please educate me. Please educate me.
I'm about to. Be quiet and I will. Now, first of all, nobody's calling for people to be deported because of their views. We have laws in this country against organizations that are prescribed as terrorists, and I have no problem with terrorists being removed from this country under the laws of this country. Secondly, Donald Trump never said that the people calling for the eradication of Jews were fine people. If you go and look at his quotes, he actually condemned them and said they should be condemned absolutely. But the people who were there protesting about the statues, they were the ones that were fine people.
And you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group too.
The press is treated unfairly, sir. I'm sorry, I just didn't understand what you were saying. You were saying the press has treated white nationalists unfairly?
No,
I just didn't understand what you were saying.
No. There were people in that rally, and I looked the night before. If you look, there were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. I'm sure in that group there were some bad ones. The following day, it looked like they had some rough, bad people, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whatever you want to call them. But you had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest and very legally protest because, you know, I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit. So I only tell you this. There are two sides to a story. I thought what took place was a horrible moment for our country, a horrible moment.
Now, you should educate yourself about those things. And thirdly, you should educate about the fact that, regrettably, I would quite like to have a First Amendment here in the UK. We do not have a First Amendment, and I would have a lot more sympathy with your argument if we hadn't spent the last 10 years watching people be sacked from their jobs for saying women are women and men are men.
Yeah, and I would also add that when you say that I'm not respecting free speech, Vajat, when I say I don't respect people who won't condemn Hamas,
I didn't say you.
No, but they can say it. They can say it. I just don't have to respect it. It's a bit like when I block people on Twitter.
Of course, you don't have to respect it.
No, but when I block people on X, for example, or formerly Twitter, and people say, well, you're suppressing their free speech. No, I'm not. They can still tweet what the hell they like. I just don't have to read it. I don't have to hear it. You know, that actually is what free speech is. And the First Amendment, which is one of the most powerful protectors of free speech in the world, it doesn't cover many things, from child pornography to defamation to all sorts of stuff is not protected by the First Amendment. And nobody, I don't think, who looks at this sensibly would say that a terror group that espouses not just hatred, but violent hatred and the mass killing of people, that is never protected by free speech, is it? And should it be?
It shouldn't be, but listen, this is interesting. Speaking about education, allow me to retort and educate. And I'll give you an example about the double standards, and I want you guys to really respond to this. Speaking about terrorism and violence, on the platform you mentioned, X, also known as Twitter, one of the wealthiest men, Elon Musk, has repeatedly promoted the replacement theory, an anti-Semitic conspiracy that blames Jews for trying to weaken and replace Western civilization with Muslims and immigrants and LGBTQ communities, right? That conspiracy theory has radicalized individuals to commit violence against Jews, against Muslims, against black people, against Latinos. That conspiracy has been retweeted and platformed and mainstreamed by the Republican Party, people like Elise Stefanik and Donald Trump, who, by the way, dined with Nick Fuentes, the leading white nationalist leader in America. You guys are fine with that.
I'm not fine with it.
When it comes to any other group that says something...
Who said we're fine with that?
Wait a minute. I wrote a whole...
Who said we're
fine with it? I wrote a whole column condemning it. What are you talking about?
Good. But you're not going to deport them, right? Are you going to deport them? Are you going to call them out for literally being linked to a terrorist conspiracy?
People who are citizens who are not citizens of the country should be deported if they're members of a terrorist group. Why don't you understand the distinction
should national
between
security,
being a member of a terrorist
should the
group
government
and saying something
should
wrong?
Should U.S. and UK government and national security go after these groups and these elected officials and these organizations that have literally repeated and mainstreamed a conspiracy that has motivated terrorists to commit terrorism?
Anyone who is a member of a terrorist group should be prosecuted under the law of the country in which they are a terrorist group.
That's not what I asked. That's not what I asked.
Well, but that's what I said. So you were challenging me about something I didn't say.
And I'm very curious.
People are allowed to have
why you are not
opinions,
concerned about this.
But in this instance, I didn't say I wasn't concerned about it. I said you can't deport citizens of the country in which they live, A. And B, I keep pointing out to you that the person we're talking about in this case, this NHS GP, he is a member of a terrorist group. We're not talking about him having the wrong opinions. People are allowed to have the wrong opinions, both in this country and in your country. It's something that we all celebrate as part of the heritage of Western civilization, and we would all, I hope, defend. The issue here is we have laws in this country about being a member of a terrorist group, and people who are members of a terrorist group, I hope you would agree with me, should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And if they are prosecuted to the extent of the law and they are foreign citizens, should be deported. Will we agree on that?
We will agree on that. And I'll also say this, for those who are watching, especially the youth, there's a great meme, a Family Guy meme, where there's a chart of who gets to be labeled a terrorist and who doesn't. The front part of the chart is when you have light skin, you're not a terrorist. When it gets darker and darker,
people like you always bring race into it. It's got nothing to do with race and everything to do with people who kill people. Yes, people like you, race baiters like you.
I have not heard you.
Yes.
And I've not heard you really express this much outrage against the #1 domestic terror threat against all our communities in America and the UK, which is rising white nationalism.
I am a dark-skinned, first-generation immigrant to the UK. I don't play your racial games. Stop using your skin color as a way to shut other people up, and let's talk about the issue. The issue here is, should we tolerate foreign terrorists in our country, or should we remove them? And my opinion is we should remove people who are not conducive to this country. And if someone like me, first-generation immigrant, comes here and wants to be a terrorist, it is first-generation immigrants like me that are at the front of the queue to get them out.
Okay. It's been a fascinating debate.
Remove people who are not conducive to the society.
It's been a fascinating debate. I actually think
who are terrorists, yes.
I actually think, Vajad, to be fair to you, I do think that the white nationalism related terrorist acts that we see increasingly is never played up as much, actually, as Islamist terror was, particularly in the heyday of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. I think it's a perfectly valid point to make, for what it's worth. I think I've made that point, actually, before. Before I let you go, Konstantin, you've done a lot of filming with the pro-Palestinian marches in London. What did you find?
Well, I actually went over the last few months, Piers. We went to the protest against anti-Semitism. We went to 2 pro-Palestine protests. We went to an Extinction Rebellion protest, which was very, very funny. I encourage people to go and watch that. But at the latest pro-Palestine protest in particular, there were some fascinating scenes. And, you know, we really tried to talk to people with an open mind. I don't have, actually, contrary to the discussion we've just had, a particularly strong position on it. I'm interested really in getting people's views. And one of the things that came through very strongly is The young people in particular, of whom there are many, the way I would kind of describe the demographics are, it's a mixture of sort of beards and headscarves on the one hand and septum piercings and colored hair on the other. The young people who are there in particular, when you ask them very, very basic questions, you know, from which river to
well,
which
let's take a look at a clip, actually. We've got a clip with some of this. Let's watch it here.
So I just noticed the signs that you got from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What does that mean?
Well, it's quite self-explanatory.
How would that come about? What would happen to the Israelis, etc.?
I don't.
I'm trying to think of how to word it. Isn't it just as self-explanatory as the area of land? It's Palestine's land.
What's a socialist intifada?
If I'm being honest with you, I just got this at the stand over there.
Okay.
I don't actually know the definition of the word intifada.
I mean, it's kind of laughable. I don't think for a moment that a lot of people on that march are that ignorant about it. A lot of them clearly are well informed and are absolutely marching because they want peace and they want a ceasefire in Gaza. I completely understand that. But Vajahat, when you hear that, there are a lot of young people joining up in these marches who are completely clueless. And I actually blame TikTok more than anything, which is the #1 news source now for kids under 25, and spews just relentless nonsense into their heads. And that's where they get their news.
This is where I'm going to stand up for the youth. If you look at the youth, it's been a stunning change where most youth here and abroad are actually, if you will, pro-Palestinian and want the occupation to end. And the flip side to that, Piers, I would say is the following. For those who are watching, we're the same when it comes to Facebook, we're the same when it comes to X, and we're the same when it comes to mainstream media. You are a breath of fresh air because you allow multiple opinions to come on, talk about Palestinian side and Israeli side. In America, you know that this wasn't the case. And so for those people who are terrified by the TikTok, just think about what limited viewpoints that you got for 30, 40 years. And now, for better and for worse, this young generation is exposed to multiple narratives and they see for themselves what's happening, which is why you see the shift in which a lot of people, especially in Israel and here, are horrified by the Netanyahu government, want an end to the occupation, want a ceasefire, hate Hamas, hate extremists in the Netanyahu government, and believe that Palestinians have a right to freedom.
Yeah, well, they certainly do, in my estimation. But there is one clip, Konstantin, which really got to me. It was about me. Let's take a look.
So I see you've got a sign there that says journalism that get paid for selling lies, and I'm guessing that's Piers Morgan, right? Why do you say that this is journalism that's selling lies?
It's very obvious what is going on, all the lies about what happened on the October 7th, the justification for the genocide, they're all based on lies.
When you say lies about October 7th, what do you mean?
All those allegations that we never saw any footages of decapitated children that Piers Morgan always asked about, and all those women that got gang raped.
I mean, it was quite extraordinary, Konstantin, because one of the problems with platforming everybody actually for the last 3 months is that you end up with the extremes on both sides hating you with equal vengeance and often being completely ill-informed actually about what I've actually said. But it was enlightening to see that because I see that all day long on social media, that kind of view, which is really based on a lack of reality.
Well, there was a lot of that going on in the protest. And interestingly, I mean, you say most people there are well informed. We released in that half-an-hour documentary that people can go to TRIGGERnometry, our YouTube channel, and watch. We released every single interview that we did. So we haven't cherry-picked these moments to make people look bad or anything like that. It contains, they're shortened down, but they are basically the content of what people said to us.
Okay.
And I have to say, most of the people we spoke to, didn't really seem actually that well informed, most of them. And secondly, I would say there was an awful lot of the sort of thing you just heard where people have some kind of way of pretending October 7th didn't happen. In fact, the first person you see in the video talks about how it's a false flag operation. There seems to be a lot of that going on too, where people are sort of, they sort of wish away the terrorist attack on October 7th. And it makes sense because if you're calling for a ceasefire, and you're calling on Israel to unilaterally, essentially, engage in the ceasefire, you have to pretend October 7th didn't happen because otherwise you'd be calling on Hamas to hand over the hostages and the terrorists who took them because that's how you get a ceasefire.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest blow-ups I had, Vajahat, was after that interview with that doctor, actually, in which I'd already read out some quotes from another member of his